host, Vanessa.
Hi, Bill.
Hey.
It's been a while, I feel like, since we've
I
been
know.
together live. I know last week's episode was a smash hit. I was having a little bit of FOMO not being there with you guys, with Justin, Amanda, and Zoraida, but Zoraida killed it. But I'm happy to be here.
Well, thanks. And of course, this is when we pretend we weren't just talking 5 minutes ago. And act like, oh yeah, good to see you. Yeah.
I am happy to be here, though. It is nice.
Well, and thank you for being the media czar, taking care of monitoring all these broadcasts and posting on Instagram and Facebook. I want to give credit where credit is due. Thank you so much for all that.
Of course. Thank you for entrusting me with it all. It is a great honor, and it's just great to be able to be here with you alongside live shows like this, because the testimony I know helps me in my own personal journey. Definitely inspiring, makes me want to dig harder into the process, because you can see what the process does for people in their lives when they tap into it. So really excited to hear from our guest today.
Yep. Well, today's definitely not going to be any different. Yeah. So Hero, I've known her. I don't even know. I lose count of how long I've known people. It's a couple of years, at least a couple of years. And I asked her to do this interview because she is one of those powerful examples of life transformation that you just talked about. But it didn't come easy, and I don't think it ever comes easy for anybody, of course. But she's going to be sharing some of those particular challenges today that she's gone through along her journey. She's been a great student, as you are, Vanessa, and just like so many people that have been on, a great student of the process, really dedicated to the process, doing the work, doing the hard work to lead into that life transformation. And she didn't always feel like she was doing that, but she was.
Relatable.
Mm-hmm. And these challenges range from personal struggles with knowing herself, like most of us, to other physical challenges and areas of loss in her life. So I believe she's really going to bring a ton of encouragement to tons of people today, too. So let's welcome Hero. Hey.
Hi.
How are you?
I was just going to say, I don't think we can hear you.
You can't hear me?
It's a little bit low. Can you hear Vanessa?
I can.
Okay. I don't know. It'll be okay, I guess. If she can hear, then it'll be fine. Well, thanks for being here. Again, we just talked a few minutes ago, so we're pretending now like we actually didn't talk a few minutes ago, But honestly, thank you for being here. I know this is a big step for you to kind of enter into something like this.
Yep.
We're gonna kill it, girl. I'm so excited.
So, yeah, as we, kind of like we talked about yesterday, what I always like to do is just so that people can get to know you a little bit, and so because everybody can relate to our childhood on some level or another, and kind of where did we come from? We didn't just pop up on the scene in the business or something and just start to exist, So we have a little bit of a history, all of us do. And most of us, if not all of us, have a fair amount or maybe even a larger amount of dysfunction, like myself, in our history as well. So I'm hoping that you can kind of, start off a little bit about your childhood, and can later on we'll get up to speed in terms of the business and all that.
Sure. I mean, born and raised in Florida, I have been a daddy's girl my entire life. And that's kind of where my dysfunction started, was my dad did not share that sentiment, to put it nicely. And so growing up, it was just, I was always in a constant state of disappointment. I will say I'm a supine. And so I always have that feeling of unworthiness about me, but then, seeking that approval from the one person I wanted, and he just constantly dismissed me. It kind of escalated that unworthiness a lot. And so, my dad always wanted a boy. And so that kind of led me into sports. I was always like the tomboy, trying to be the son he always wanted. But I found that I was really good at sports. And so it kind of just went in a little bit of an unhealthy direction, because I started to put my entire identity into my athletic abilities, because that was where I got recognized. That was where I felt, I belonged somewhere. I was worthy. I had something to add. So
when did that start, Hero? What age around there was that starting?
I mean, I've been an athlete my entire life, basically since I could walk. But I think really like getting into it was really in high school. Because, in high school, it's already a really awkward time, going through puberty and no one belongs and there's cliques. And so I think that was when I really started to kind of like lean into the sports a lot, was because it was the only time I was worth anything, I guess. So.
Okay, so in the years kind of leading up to that, through childhood and adolescence, and kind of leading in that, and then, just to reflect again on what the situation with your dad. So
Yeah.
it sounds like it was definitely a one-sided affair in terms of
Yeah.
like you really longed for that in your heart and really wanted that recognition and be daddy's princess and all of that. But was he just unavailable, emotionally unavailable, physically unavailable?
Kind of both. Even when he was physically there, he would intentionally leave the house kind of thing to get away. I mean, I remember like even for birthdays, every event, actually not just birthdays, were scheduled around my dad not being around, because it was a toxic environment when he was there emotionally. And so in order to like create a somewhat enjoyable environment, it was getting him out of the way almost. And so it was a weird dynamic, because that's who I wanted, but that was like the one person who couldn't be there to have a good time. I mean, yeah, he wasn't really part of my life. I would go to him, he would kind of dismiss me. I'd want to hang out and he would just say no, like not even give a reason. He was just like, I'm busy. If I was with him, it was either like incredibly uncomfortable or I would get like one word answers. A lot of it was just his energy. Like it was an extremely powerful, like aggressive, negative energy all the time. And so I was always uncomfortable around it. I was always kind of scared just of like what's going to happen. I mean, if he would get in a bad mood, he would like go around the house and slam the doors and slam the cabinets, and I'd go like run and hide in my closet, to just like get away from it. So it was just kind of all of the
So
above.
how did that affect you? Because as you're sharing that, and again, all of our stories are a little bit different. I know for me, like not having an emotional connection with either of my parents, and my mother was an alcoholic, and my dad was codependent, and so nobody really talked about anything in the house. And
Yeah.
I'm a melancholic compulsive across the board, so I was already an island unto myself. And so, and I had a lot of weight on back in those days too. So I was insecure about my weight. I was insecure, period, because there was no center of gravity for me at all. How did that affect you in, especially, preteen, teen years going into high school in terms of, we use the word identity pretty often.
Yeah.
For you, how did that pan out, like in your, in terms of insecurities and so on?
Oh, wildly insecure. I mean, across the board in every way, shape, and form, and about everything, I was insecure. So I'm not entirely sure how to answer that otherwise, though.
I definitely relate, Hero. I think my situation, I definitely have had dynamics with my father that have played out that are very interesting. I think for me, it was almost an opposite, where my dad was very hands on, but did so in a way that was unhealthy. So, although I was getting attention, it wasn't the right attention, the attention that I needed to kind of pour into shaping me and growing me. And I had to be someone else for him. I actually had to be anything that anyone in my family needed. So it played out in the same way, though, where like I was seeking recognition in the wrong way. Felt worthless, all of those things. So I know for me, I sought out the attention in bad ways. So how do you feel like that kind of played out in your life, where that lack of recognition or attentiveness kind of led to you exploring in other ways that maybe weren't the most healthy?
Actually, kind of the opposite. So I don't know if it's partially my temperament or other things, but it was, so my sister was the academic. Like she thrived in school, and My mom was great, but she was always compensating for my dad to try and like make up for things. And I always felt like I wasn't living up to anyone or anything outside of the physical realm. And so I actually kind of retreated. I think thankfully, because my mom worked so hard to instill the positive in me, I was very lucky and I didn't go down a path of like drugs or alcohol or things like that. Also, God bless me, and I'm not really a fan of alcohol. So that kind of helped. But I think it was more like I retreated. I shut down. I stopped putting myself out there, any resemblance of my real self, I would say. But I would copy the popular girls in school. I would do what they did. I attempted to become this faceless clone of what other people seem to accept. And in doing that and completely shutting down who I was, I lost that entirely. It got buried so incredibly deep that it got to a point where I was like, I don't even know who I am to be that person anymore. So I think.
Do you mean even the false clone? Was the false clone even something that you couldn't even like hold on to anymore? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, no, like I couldn't hold on to anything. And it
Wow.
got to the point where so many, like it was cycling through so fast, just to try and hold on to anything that was accepted by anyone, that I just had nothing. I was literally an empty shell of a human being. There was no substance to me whatsoever.
So you tried on the false self, and the false self narrative didn't even work.
No. Mm-mm.
Yeah.
This
That's
is so
amazing.
powerful, and I wish my younger self would have heard someone like talking about this, because the things that you're saying are like pinpointing in my heart and my head, and I'm like, wow, like, and my situation was different, but similar in the sense of like when you lose yourself, like you obviously have to try to conform to something. Like you have to think you know who you are, but it's like that that's not you, but then you don't know what to do with that, so it's this internal conflict. And I remember feeling all of those things when sitting with Bill, and like Bill facing me with the question of like, well, who are you? And I had no idea, and that's actually the most frightening thing of all time.
Yep.
Well, that's why I wanted to dig a little bit deeper for everybody's benefit, so that they had a, like where did you come from, in that journey of, losing, yourself. And then, but that part, like Justin chimed in there, you can see it up there on the screen now. And Justin, of course, is a choleric as well. And cholerics, of course, can blast through tons of things, but sometimes those supines, it's even difficult for them as a supine, even when they're a choleric, because there's such a deep need. And that's why when he referred to as little need as possible to their own detriment, because they don't feel like they deserve anything. And so that was compounded in your life because your dad didn't give you the identity that you were looking for, which that's why we need to forgive our parents, because if we don't, there's a judgment in our hearts that's going to remain there, and it's going to just keep coming up in my life. And that's where generational transfers come from, of course. So yeah, so thank you for kind of laying that groundwork. That's huge. So moving forward, I guess so before college, the athletic part started to come into being, and that part about kind of finding that bit of identity starting to grow. Is that what happened?
Yeah. I kind of realized it was the one thing I could do in my family that just no one else could really do at my level. And so I got a lot of recognition for that. And so I just kind of based my entire life around that path. I mean, I was pre-med in school initially because, everyone loves doctors. Like, so I was like, great. I love the recognition I got when I told people I was pre-med. They're like, wow, you must be smart. I was like, well, I am, but not because of that.
Man.
Right?
I wanted to be a lawyer. It was the same thing. It's like, wow, the status quo,
Yeah.
So true.
And it was going to be an orthopedic surgeon at that, because again, with sports, I was like, I had so many people put me back together and give me multiple chances. And I wanted to be able to do that and help others. So I was like, yeah, let's be an orthopedic surgeon, combine all the things I love. And then I shadowed a couple doctors and I was like, oh no, we're not doing this. So then I ran away and joined the circus, like anyone would. And that's when I
pretty
went
common,
and
right?
trained. Huh?
Pretty common thing people to do.
I mean, I thought so, yeah. So I went up to Montreal and I actually trained for Cirque du Soleil because that was all I had. I was like, this is what I'm good at. This is what I'm going to do with my life. And then very grateful to God because that did not pan out. And that kind of brought me here because without him losing that, which is what I thought was everything to me at the time, I wouldn't have ended up here and I would have continued to be just an empty human. So.
So talk a little bit about like the formation of that identity, because you had tried that before, like you said, right? Putting on that, I love the terminology you had, which was the faceless clone. I haven't used that yet, but you're going to start.
It's going to appear in a daily. I saw Bill's eyes now. He's writing it down. I love it.
100%. That's coming up for sure. But you tried the faceless clone approach, right? And then the athlete part was forming and shaping. So talk a little bit about how that actually formed and shaped that identity for you.
What do you mean? Can you ask that a different way?
Well, yeah, because you told me like that was the next stop, I guess, in trying to find your identity.
Yeah.
As an athlete, what were the nuts and bolts of that, in terms of having that be your identity? In other words, was it a performance thing? Like if I do it really well, then that's who I am. And
yeah, kind of. So it was a lot of it was actually wanting a place to belong. So like that team mentality that you get in sports, like you have a uniform, you match, like you don't have to. I was scared to be me. And so on a team, you get to shine without being you, if that makes sense, because you're part of the team. You have the same uniform. You're doing the same motions, the same routine. You know what I mean? Like you're unified without having to stand out. And so I felt safer in that type of environment where I didn't have to stand out in any way, shape, or form, but I still got to do something I felt added value. Like I was good at this. I could do this. And I think that's really what drew me to it, but it was still empty. I was doing it and I was doing it well. And I mean, I was doing it at the professional level, but it didn't do anything in the end. It was still this hollow, empty gesture. I was going through the motions. These motions I happened to be better at than others, but they were still just empty motions with no meaning behind them. There was no substance to it. But I really kind of like leaned into that because I didn't have anything else, to be honest. It was like my mustard seed of identity initially. And then when that's all you have, you lean on it and you grow. But it wasn't the right mustard seed.
So that's a great statement. So I guess traveling forward, and I'm also assuming that the lack of connection with your dad continued throughout all of those years as well.
Oh yeah, it's going to this day. We're going strong.
Okay. So, but enter in, I guess next phase would be maybe finding the business.
Yeah.
Junction along the way.
Yeah. So, I mean, a step like before that, just based on what we may or may not touch on in the future. But after I left Cirque, I had no idea what to do with my life, no idea what I wanted, very stranded, very lost. But my aunt and uncle, who actually live in Jersey, agreed to take me in. They're like, we know you love New York City. You've always wanted to live close to there. You're more than welcome to come live with us as long as you need. And since I couldn't really go home, I mean, I could, but I wasn't welcomed there. And so I chose to move in with them. And I think that was the first step to actually starting to put me back together, was God giving me them, because they love unconditionally. And my uncle was very much a father figure to me. You know, he was the dad that I had always wanted growing up. Like, he wanted to watch TV with me. He made jokes with me. Like, he would invite me out to go do things. If I was hiding in my room, which I did a lot in the beginning, he'd come find me and be like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "Nothing." He's like, "Well, come be with us. Like, come sit with us, have dinner with us, enjoy like this quality time together." You know, I called him my faux father and he called me his faux daughter. And so we even, you know, had inside jokes about it. And, you know, it was the first steps to starting to put back the pieces of what had been broken for so long, was living with them. And then obviously I got introduced to this business, where I met kind of the second couple that started to put me back together, which was Henry and Alexandra Diaz. Because I remember right after, maybe a day or two after I, you know, got launched into this business, Alexandra had me over just to say hi and get to know me. And I just remember crying on her couch hysterically. And I kind of told her, you know, a little bit about my dad, not much, because back then I wasn't comfortable talking about it. You know, it still hurt. And I felt like I wasn't allowed to talk about it because who was I to have an issue, you know? But very quickly, Alexandra's like, "I love you, but you need Bill." And so she very lovingly encouraged me to go seek out Bill. And of course I didn't, not right away, because, you know, why would I? And so it took a couple months, and then eventually I, you know, did a quick like introduction call. I don't know if you still do those, but it was like an introduction call with Bill. We didn't even get like 10 minutes into the call, and he was like, "Yeah, we're gonna book a session. Just do this and this and this, and I'll talk to you soon." And I was like, "Okay." So it's, yeah. And here we are.
Well, here we are after a bit of a journey, you know, because yeah, we met in that way. But I mean, just reflecting on the earliest of days, um, everything that you had gone through up until that point, um, I don't know how else to put this. I mean, it left its mark on you, you know, in terms of, you know, those insecurities were very, very deep, um, very deep. And I guess this was back before COVID, and we had some live events and stuff where I had met you, and there were so many things that you had believed about yourself and told me about. For example, I'm not going to talk about them here,
Thank you.
but and then when I met you, and I was like, why is she saying these things? Like, these things don't exist, you know? But it really showed me, like, just like it reminded me of myself, actually. And everybody's really the same. It's just a different package of dysfunction and brokenness, you know, that we have to just kind of seek it out and go into and uncover it and be healed. But, you know, again, like thinking back on that, for me, not everybody knows you that way, but I did. I know how far you've come in this process. So talk a little bit more, like keep going ahead, like what the earliest times of doing the work was like for you.
Well, that took a while, because the first several sessions I just cried. Like, at least the first 3 sessions, I don't even think I spoke to you. Maybe like 2 sentences, 20 words total the entire hour. It was just me crying because I was so, like, I couldn't say anything, and there was nothing to say. There was nothing there to even bring up, because, you know, as a supine, I buried everything so deep. So other than to say my dad doesn't like me, but outside of that, I had nothing to even talk about, because it was buried so deep under lock and key. I mean, there was no getting that out. We had poured concrete, built a house, tore it down, poured more concrete. Like, it was deep. And so a lot of the first sessions, I'm not even sure there was work done. But I remember you gave me the homework. The first homework I remember was journaling. Like, that's the first work I actually remember intentionally doing, was the journaling. And that was so hard back then. I mean, it's not the easiest now, but it gets easier. But back then, I remember I stressed about it for like 2 full weeks to write what ended up to be like 1 page handwritten, not even typed, of like single spaced something or another about my dad. And I remember I was in tears writing it. And it wasn't even about what I wrote. It was because I was so afraid to show it to you. I was afraid to let you down. I was afraid that I wasn't doing it right because, I need to know. I like bullets. I want to know the steps, exactly how to do them, black and white. Like, I thrive. And you didn't give me that. You're like, I just want you to write. And so I remember that was the first time it kind of like came out and broke down. And then your response was really inspiring to me because, I mean, I understand better now, but back then I was like, wait, he's not going to tell me this is wrong. He's not going to tell me I'm being over dramatic. He's not saying my feelings are unvalid. You were just like, wow, this is powerful. And I remember that, and that stuck with me. And of course, then I fought with you and I was like, no, it's not. And then I started crying again, but we got better over time. But I remember that was the first bit of work you actually had me do, was to just start journaling, start getting everything out of my head and into something that I can see and read, because when you don't know how to hold your thoughts captive, you don't know where you're going to go. And so it's really hard to work on things that aren't tangible. And so putting things on paper allowed me to revisit it and be like, oh, this is something I can talk to Bill about. Oh, hey, this is actually something that I can work on too. It gave me like a framework kind of to follow when we would get together of things that should probably be talked about.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's such a great point because, yes, supines are the ones who have the most difficult time journaling, of course, just because they do bury things and they don't grieve things very well. And so all that's buried. And so you kind of started at the beginning of the food chain there because you didn't know how to do anything. Most people don't. So there was that part. There was you mentioned taking your thoughts captive part that goes along with the package. And then God goes along with the package too. And that was some kind of unknown territory as well, right?
Yeah. So I was technically raised Catholic, but I really rejected religion, especially growing up. But I was always spiritual, I would say. Like, my mom always instilled something greater than us kind of mentality. So I wouldn't say I was starting from scratch with that, but I really wasn't like believing in God and Jesus and all of that. And I fought you on that a long time. You actually gave me a really great book that helped kind of force me to view it a different way. And that was The Case for Faith. You gave me that book to start with. But that really started to get me wondering, like, well, what am I missing? Is this a thing? Like, is this what I need? Like, I was so desperate. I was willing to try anything. And I remember you telling me that's how I learned mustard seed of faith was from you. Because you insisted, you reassured me that as long as I had a mustard seed of faith, that's all I needed. And that in time it would grow and it would, thrive and flourish. But it was really hard to like learn a new way of thinking in terms of spirituality. It was very important to do that, but it was very hard and very weird to kind of like find my way through all of that. So.
Well, and so many people, including Vanessa, came in the doors without having that foundation there too, and it's not a prerequisite by any means, just so that everybody's watching. It doesn't matter what you believe in or where you came from. But we are always encouraging, that if the spiritual connection is missing, that's really where the DNA of the person lies. It's not merely, obviously it can't be in your emotions because your emotions are broken and all over the place. You're trying to find identity in that place and it didn't work. It's not found in your upbringing necessarily, in your parental relationships and all of that, because that's usually broken. It is innate, but because of all that brokenness layering over the top and all that dysfunction, it's so far down in there. It's like, how do we even find that? And just kind of going over your notes that you sent me last night, I told you I might refer to these. You said the biggest truth that you needed to uncover was just knowing who you were. So what I'd like you to do is you've mentioned the supine part of your temperament already a couple of times, but How important was the temperament aspect of things in that process too, of understanding yourself?
Oh, that was a game changer. That kind of shifted everything for me, and kind of allowed that door to open to God in a way, because it was, I mean, in a way, it's kind of science based, and so it was tangible. It's something I could study, that made a lot of sense to me. And I mean, I still want to retake my test, Bill. Just saying, but really, because I remember taking the test and I denied everything. You know, when Bill was first going over it, I was like, I denied it or I begrudgingly accepted it. You know, he'd read off the things and he's like this, and I was like, yes, yes, like rolling my eyes the whole time, not wanting to own up to any of the truth that was there. And then, but really, when I finally started to see what Bill was seeing, you know, when I started to do the work and I could line it up with the test in a way and kind of be like, oh, well, this matches up with what he was saying about this. And it kind of helped to connect the dots and create a clearer picture for me to continue doing the work and continue learning, because it gave me a foundation to kind of go back to. So when I didn't have Bill, I could still go back to my test and reread it and look into it. And it really helped me kind of develop my temperament. I mean, I studies anyone who will send me their test, I study. And it really helped me understand how to interact with people, how to interact with myself, and kind of gave me that foundation to go off of.
You know, it's and when you mentioned something like they started to take form and shape a bit. You know, I actually call the test for a lot of people like a roadmap to discover who you are. You know, because I was thinking when you were sharing too, is like how far we get away from the mark of understanding who we actually are, in terms of our makeup and our propensities and our strengths and weaknesses and all of that. And you just set out a perfect example of what it's supposed to be like, is to enter into that, not like look at it and go, yeah, it's interesting, and then put it on the shelf and never refer to it again. It's like you have to enter into that reality so that you can engage in the transformation process. Because if you don't know what your propensities are and your strengths and weaknesses, as simple as that, like you said, it's on that level, it's science based.
Yeah.
You know, so that we can there's very clear boundaries with those things that we can see and experience simply by changing one small aspect and turning it from a weakness
Yeah.
into strength. Ness, you want to throw anything on that level? Because I know that you experienced a lot of that same thing too.
I will say real quick, and then Vanessa, all you, but it also gave me something to control when everything else was falling apart, because we don't use our temperaments as a crutch. But knowing that as a supine, I'm prone to being a victim, I could choose going into situations not to do that. And so it gave me a sense of control over something, but I couldn't control it if I didn't understand the innate originality of it. So
100%. That's great. That's such
Yeah,
a
I
perfect example.
totally relate to that as well. I remember taking the temperament test, getting it back and being like, all right, this is like a personality test, but better. And then realize that it was based in spirituality and like essentially how God composed you. And I was like, I don't know. I don't know. I was just skeptical, but
Yeah.
and then it was funny when similar to you, like when Bill went through the test, there was two sides of, well, a little different. One part of me was like, okay, he's touching on things and this is exactly how I am. I don't know how he knows this. This is kind of freaky. And then the other side also then was like, wait, but that's not me, because I also didn't know who I was. And I was also had this like fake persona, and I wasn't in touch with those sides of me. So it's so crazy how everyone's experiences can kind of, they all are similar. I hear the same thing where people are like, I need to retake my test. That's not me at all. But it is you. It's just not how you've been living or how you view yourself or how you've been presenting yourself. So that was my experience. So I totally relate.
But Vanessa, I mean, that for you, it was a game changer, just like it was for Hero in terms of, you know, you're reacting and responding, for example.
Yeah,
You know,
I mean, I was all over the place in terms of my emotions, and I didn't So for example, I have sanguine in my temperament, so the sanguine swing was super real for me, and that made me feel insane because I was like, hey, why am I like so needy 1 minute and then want to be bothered by nobody the next? Because I was going from independent to dependent super quick. So my goal when looking at my temperament was like, okay, breaking it down into what negative parts of my temperament are showing up and what positive parts are showing up. It was a lot of negative at the time that I had to kind of work on. So like the goal was, all right, let's minimize, for example, the swing. And really having to do that, I had to get in touch with my emotions, communicate my emotions. But having that as a foundation was so powerful because I didn't feel out of control anymore. And as a compulsive choleric, feeling out of control was like the worst thing ever. So Bill brought me some peace there in sharing my temperament with me. So I completely agree. I used it as something to kind of just look at every single day and just work off of because I didn't have anything else before. I was just kind of like blindly flowing through the emotions and like trying to figure out why some people I was blowing up on them and the others I was super sweet and sensitive. Bill calls me a supine in disguise. So it was a mumble jumble of things.
Yep.
So you were navigating, Hero, ahead, moving slowly ahead, right? And kind of reading the books. I know we recommend, I don't remember half the books. I'm sure I recommended to you.
You recommended a lot. So.
Mm-hmm. But I'm keeping an eye on the time too, because there was a few events that came along the way. And looking back on it, even collectively, I'm thanking God in my heart because, if you hadn't done the work and you hadn't reached the place of having a foundation inside of you when these events happened, I think it obviously would have been a completely different outcome. So let's talk about those events. So I guess the first one I would bring up would be the loss of your uncle.
Okay.
And kind of navigating through that. And just so everybody else knows, we were chatting a little bit earlier about that. And there's a coinciding factor that we'll get to in a moment or two that puts a little cover over that, I guess, because you don't remember some of those things. And we can't tell everybody why you don't remember some of those things. But I did because we were just talking about them. And there was a lot of extenuating circumstances with your parents. I'm kind of setting the stage so you can go back into that. Along the way down in Florida when you had traveled down there and had to stay with them. And I do remember lots and lots of phone calls that we had. You were sitting in the car most of the time when that was going on.
Yep. It was the only safe place I had. So.
But I'll remind everybody what you said before, like this uncle was the kind of the dad that you had never had. So this was a hugely important relationship in your life.
Yep.
So yeah, let's talk about that. Whatever you can remember of that and the grief of all of that. I know you said you really can't put your finger completely on that, but let's just talk about that a bit.
Can you give me something to go off of? That's really open-ended.
Yeah, I guess it is. I can probably, like we said before, I can probably recall more than you. As we're talking about it, I can kind of remember that. And I think you kind of looked at me as a kind of a bit of a stand-in too, as a father figure along that pathway.
Absolutely.
And being there for you. And even if you didn't say anything and if you just cried, it didn't make any difference.
Yeah, I remember that. I mean, I will say God is good and there's no mistakes. So anyone who works with Bill knows that you book Bill like 6 to 10 months out. It's not planned. And so I had, X number of sessions timed out already on the books. But it just so happened that I had a session with Bill 2 days after my uncle passed. And I remember that's really the session that sticks out to me in terms of this hurdle, was because, Bill had known, I had been texting him and he knew what was going on. And so I don't think I said a single word during that session. I called Bill, got on the thing, and he just looked at me and I just completely broke down. And Bill didn't say much, but I was grateful because he didn't have to. He was there. And he gave me a really safe place to just express myself how I needed to, with no judgment, with no one telling me how I should feel or that this was normal, or, you know, any of the things that come along with losing someone. And I just let it all out. Okay, I let some of it out. It was only an hour call, but you know, I let it out, and I think that was a huge help to start that grieving process of accepting and going through all the motions of losing someone that important, of losing anyone actually. um but you know, it's, you know, a lot of times people think therapy and counseling is all about excessive communication, or it's about, you know, saying certain things. But I learned in that moment, like, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just learning how to feel in the moment what you're feeling, and learning how to not shove it down. um and just learning that it's okay to have emotions. Like, you don't want to live by them, but they're real, and you're going to have to experience them at times. And to have a safe situation that I could really just be myself in that moment that I needed to be, to process, to feel, to accept, was incredibly powerful. And if I hadn't been doing EIS, one, I don't know that I would have been in a place to express any grief whatsoever. And two, I wouldn't have had an outlet like that. You know, I wouldn't have been able to express it even if I wanted to. And so I was incredibly grateful for that.
And along the way of that too, you also had the in your face dysfunction with your dad and mom and your family.
Oh, well, yeah, because unfortunately I was trapped inside a house with my parents for COVID. And so I couldn't go anywhere. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't lean on anyone else. I was living in this state of hatred and negativity. It was palpable, like, it was intense. And so to try and keep my head above water when my entire environment was negative and toxic, and then to experience something that overwhelming of emotion on top of it, it was a lot. It was very hard to handle.
Well, I remember a lot of those calls, and you're right. I mean, it was just a lot of quietness many times, and just crying, and just kind of being a shoulder for you to cry on, and give you a couple little signposts here and there to follow, and maybe a book to read or whatever, you know. But yeah, you know, and that's why I said it's important that, you know, even if you don't remember everything about those times, I think every one of those calls for you was important. And also led up to the next event that we're going to talk about. And there's a few things we didn't talk about today, like you've been through multiple surgeries in your life, on your back, and are very acquainted with physical pain and all the stuff that goes along with recovery and everything else. And then this one came along, which was, I'll let you go ahead and talk about that, because this presented, this was a whole nother level of work.
Yeah. This, I think, of all things I've gone through, this was probably the most challenging. But I was involved in an accident in Central Park. And all I know is that I woke up in the hospital. I have no memory of the event, full-blown amnesia from apparently like 2 or 3 full days. And the only memory I have is like a 5-10 minute memory of waking up in the hospital. And the next thing I know was I woke up at home. I was covered in bandages. I couldn't move, and I couldn't remember anything. So it was a lot.
Yeah, and that was a really difficult, that was challenging for me too, because I haven't worked with that many people in that kind of a situation. And, you know, for me, you know, from the angle that I come from with using a word like discernment, like having to discern along your pathway, like how to help you when you don't remember things. And, you know, I'm mentioning things that under normal circumstances you'd be able to kind of latch onto that you weren't able to latch onto and things like that. But one of the things that I do remember quite clearly was you felt somewhere along that initial part of that journey was that all the work that you had done up until that point was lost. Can you explain that part of it?
I will do my best.
Mhm.
I do vaguely remember that because, I mean, your brain controls everything about you. It is the computer, right? And so it controls your body temperature, it controls your appetite, but it also controls your emotions, it controls your memory, every part of which had been damaged in the accident. And so my emotions were running absolutely unchecked. Like my melancholy and supine were going rampant. But I couldn't hold my thoughts captive because I couldn't remember my thoughts. And so I would have these thoughts, but I couldn't remember them. But the feelings that were brought up from the thoughts lingered. I could feel the feelings of it, but I had no idea what was initiating those feelings. And so, it wiped out so much memory. And thankfully, a lot of it came back. But I felt like my old self. I felt like a victim. I felt like no one cared. I felt unworthy. Everything was shattered. And it makes sense because my brain was damaged. It was hurt. It was injured. But trying to process something and not being able to retain anything made it incredibly difficult. So I kind of reverted back to a default. Because I've been doing the work with Bill for a while now, but anyone who knows how to create habits, I had been building negative, worthless, like feelings of unworthiness habits for 30 years. I had only been building these new habits with Bill for a couple years. And so I kind of defaulted and I panicked. I couldn't remember anything. And I felt, apparently I really wasn't alone that much. My friends would come visit me. They sent video that they took of us like playing games together and talking, but I couldn't remember anyone being there. Every time I woke up, every time my brain reset, I was alone. And so I just felt scared, and I felt like I lost everything that I had worked so hard for because I couldn't remember what I had done. I knew what I was feeling wasn't right, but I couldn't pinpoint what was because I had no memory of it. I just knew, I was like, this is old. I was like, this is bad and this is old. And I know that, but I don't know. I couldn't connect any of the dots to bring in all the work that I had done over the years. It wasn't there as far as I was concerned. And I remember Bill would tell me and I didn't believe him. And I yelled at him. Sorry, Bill. But I was like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. I was like, I haven't done any work. None of this matters. Like, what is the point of any of this? Like, why am I even here? Like, it was not the best time.
Well, and it was really interesting. That's putting it mildly, because I remember telling you things like it wasn't the classic "whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger" kind of an approach to things, although it really was. I really felt like and believed that you were going to come out more whole than you had been before it happened. Remember talking about that? I don't know whether you remember that or not, but I do. I remember talking about that, and that this was actually a part of the process. It wasn't like something that got in the way of the process, that was going to derail you or something like that. This was a part of it, and I think you actually you wrote that in your notes too. I've learned to embrace the trauma I'm entrusted with. Love that, because it comes with God's plan. When it comes to God's plan, every setback is a setup.
Mm-hmm.
When I see a plan, he sees a pain, he sees purpose. When I see the scars from when I fell, he sees the stories they will tell. And when I see nothing but damaged goods, he sees something in the making because he's not finished yet. Well, that's what I'm talking about. So to gain that kind of perspective, you don't gain that perspective unless you go through something.
Yeah. Yeah. And I will say it's hard. I know I leaned on you a lot and just blind faith and trust in you and what you were telling me. because I learned that I really couldn't trust myself for anything during that time. I mean, I couldn't even remember if I had eaten lunch or not. So I had no trust in myself. So I really, really had to lean into you and trust what you were telling me. And you just kept telling me to do the work. You kept telling me to journal. You kept, reminding me and encouraging me. And I'm so grateful I did. Because another thing I wrote, but it reminded me, was the more you repeat something, the more it gets ingrained and solidified in you. And in hindsight, that concussion was such a blessing because my brain reset every 30 seconds, every minute, every day. Like, because it did that, I had to continue to do the same exact thing all day, every day. I had to remind myself of what I had learned all day, every day. So even though my conscious brain was continuously forgetting everything, my subconscious was continuously being rewritten with the scripts that I had learned and embraced through working with Bill. And so coming out of it, like, I never would have known it going into it, but coming out of it, all the work I had done is almost stronger because I, in theory, lost it and had to rebuild it continuously for months, of just really diving in, really reminding myself, doing that work, leaning on Bill, taking his counsel, taking the counsel of everyone around me. It wasn't even just Bill. I had to lean on everyone for everything. And really learning how to submit myself, and surrender everything, because, the temperament was great because it gave me a sense of control. And then the concussion was great because it took that away. It was like, you're leaning too much. You think you can control everything. You can't. You will never survive this life if you think you're going to control every step of it. And so I literally lost the ability to control anything in my life. And I had to surrender and submit to everyone and God to get me through that. And I think that was really important for me personally to learn. And I'm really, in hindsight, grateful for it.
Mm-hmm. Couldn't have been any more well-spoken, to really share that, because that's really, I mean, yours was a dramatic physical injury, but a lot of times it's an emotional setback. It's some other type of life setback. It's going to be different for everybody, of course, but that concept, it just stands so true. You don't learn to let go until you are put in a position where that's going to be your best choice and decision, and you have to make that choice and decision, and you don't have anything else to lean on, like your past understanding of things, that you had in the bank, so to speak, that you thought you lost. That's what I was referring to, is like I could see God like restoring it, and he always restores things tenfold. It's always amplified when it comes back, and you're just such a powerful testimony of that. Ness, can you relate to any of that? Because we're getting towards the end of the hour here. So
I mean, your perspective is just amazing. And this is why I value the process and what Bill's opened me and so many others up to in terms of getting in tune with faith. Because where else would you hear somebody talk about an experience like this and be grateful for it and view it as really just a plan. And, I know for me, I used to look at every bad thing that happened in my life and I was so angry. Whereas now it's having the foundation that I do and doing the work with Bill, you're able to look at things a different way and it completely changes your life. Because I'm sure if you didn't think that way, you wouldn't have been able to get to this point and look at things the way that you do and have a positive energy about it. And just amazing. I mean, I wasn't familiar with the depths of your story like this, so I just appreciate you sharing. I mean, I was over here like tearing up, and you're just so strong. People are blowing up in the chat for you. They love you and they're just giving you all the praise. So thank you so much. And I know you were worried, but you actually knocked it out of the park. You are amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah, 1,000,000%. Thank you, Hero. I know this was difficult and challenging. look, it could be me. You know, it's like I'm difficultly challenged every single week having to do this, so it's only once in a while for you.
Thanks.
But do us a favor and maybe recommend a book or two, like we mentioned last night, that you'd like to let people in on.
Oh, I have all the books to recommend. But if you're gonna limit me, I would definitely say From Spiritual Slavery to Spiritual Sonship really resonated with me. And then you mentioned the other one, Bill, yesterday. Now I forgot. The Radical something or another.
Ruthless Trust.
Ruthless Trust. That was a huge one for me too, that I really hit home.
Yeah, those are two killers. And then if you want to throw in for good measure, Posers, Fakers, and Wannabes from Brennan Manning as well. That's another good one.
I haven't read it yet, but it's on the list.
Well, yep. And where's my, I got to do my shameless plug here.
Oh, yes. I absolutely recommend The Process. It's a phenomenal book.
This one here, you mean?
Yes, that exact
this one here. Okay, yeah.
I heard the author's like a really cool guy. I don't know about you.
Yeah. Like he's really insightful. He's got a lot of good tough love too. Like he'll really like get in there and do the work with you.
Well, yeah. If you need a good smackdown, I'm the one to call for sure.
I love it. It's always like just the way Bill says it. It's like so like just even keeled, but like I'm like, all right, we're going there. Okay.
Yeah, and then they say things like, "Gotta love me," you know.
Yeah, and we do.
Part of the process.
So much love, Bill.
And then actually, Hero, my friend, sent me this, and I haven't got to it yet, but it totally lines up with our MO and EIS. It's The Servant Leader by Blanchard and Hodges. Take a look at that if anybody wants to. I always get that backwards because the camera goes backwards here.
Yeah. I didn't want to recommend that one yet, though, because Bill hasn't read it, so it's not Bill approved yet.
Well, I make sure to make that a caveat statement. So I haven't read it yet, but I know it came from you, so I know it's on board. And then Transforming Your Heart, Head, Hands, and Habits. Sounds like something we do around here, so I think it's appropriate. And yeah, next week we're going to have another special guest, and we're not going to tell you who it is because we don't know who it is yet. But we'll find out eventually.
Don't give up our secrets, Bill.
Yeah, I always make it sound like we got people up our sleeve, and I don't even know until like towards the end of the week. But Hero, thank you so much. You did so well.
Thank you.
This was the bomb, really. This is so powerful. My guess is you're going to see YouTube blow up and the Facebook page blow up after the fact, and lots more comments. Vanessa has a way of kind of following up and accentuating comments and stuff and things like that.
It's so funny. It's every week at the same time, but then I'll have people that will be like, wait, when did that go live again? So like we got to show everyone just one more time, like, hey, this is up there just so you know. So you'll definitely have more people tuning in and showing all the love like everyone here did today.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Yes, thank you so much. And everybody, just so that you know, you can tune in like right after this broadcast to repeat it and watch it on Facebook and YouTube. It's going to be posted like directly after this. And so I guess we're out of time. And you know what that means, Vanessa, right?
Yeah, EIS out.
Love you guys.
Bye.
Don't go anywhere.